When you talk about no investigation occurring, I want people again to understand the seriousness of this. You're talking about, for example, no investigation occurring after you've had to have a gunfight on your own property to protect your property from a trespasser. Talk to us about what happened there.
Well, so me being the old Army infantryman that I am, I watched their pattern of movement around our property for 6 months. And I had determined how they were accessing our property. It's like a moat. There's swamp on 3 sides. It's like mangroves. It is very difficult to get through. And the vegetation is so thick that as you move through it, it disturbs it in such a way that is easily detectable by a person who's trained to detect human movement or forces through terrain. So I had all their patterns of movement identified, what time of day we're moving, when they're at night, what time of day or night they were moving. So I waited till when I suspected that they were going to be going to one of their positions, which was about 50 feet from our house or 60 feet. And it turned out to be correct. I sat there and I waited, and I left my firearms in a place where they were easily accessible. And I watched an armed man walk into this position and begin to launch a small drone. And that's when I ran out the door armed after him. He turned, sort of had the gun pointed in my direction, went into a swamp, and then I heard gunshots from the other side of the swamp. And then that's when I began to lay what's called suppression fire into the swamp to keep the person pinned. This went in. Before I ran out the door, I told Emily to call the sheriff's department immediately and say that there's an armed trespasser on our property, which she did. And this gunfight probably went on for 20 minutes. It's hard to detect. I think the whole event was about 50 minutes. But actually, when you go through one of these situations, from my experience in combat, it's like time slows down. So, 10 minutes feels like an eternity. Well, I had exhausted my ammunition, and I had brought quite a bit with me. And I wanted to see where the sheriff's department was. So I ran back to the house and I asked Emily, where the hell's the sheriff's department? Get them on the phone. Where are they? And I reloaded. And I went back out because the maneuver that I had performed in my land, or the tactic I had deployed, was to push this person to a choke point. So it worked. This person had maneuvered through the swamp to a choke point. And before that maneuver began, they deployed a U.S. military tactical rescue beacon. And I was so shocked when this thing went up in the sky. I had not seen one of these type devices since I was in the military. I'm like, oh, looks like this is U.S. government affiliated, whoever's doing it.
Wow.
I went to
but not necessarily U.S. military, but certainly somebody that's able to get U.S. military stuff via U.S. government relationships.
Yeah, so this person ends up not being identified. After I maneuvered to the choke point, I began to lay suppression fire again on this individual. And I can hear him moving in the swamp, and he's closer. And they typically don't deploy those rescue beacons unless they're in deep trouble. Well, the gunfire on the other side of the swamp continues in my direction towards me. And, at that point, I suspect that the gunfire was actually to mask his movement through the swamp so I couldn't hear him. So that was probably their intent, really not, because if they shot me, they'd bring down an investigation. But by that time I had figured out, they're like, oh, they're doing this so I can't hear him move through the swamp. Well, simultaneously with that was happening, a vehicle at the end of my driveway, it was a late model GMC half-ton pickup with dark tinted windows, was kept slowing down. It's a 55 mile an hour road where people typically do 70. So, and it was turning around going back and forth in front of my driveway. So that was going to be the vehicle to pick this person up. And then all of a sudden I hear sirens coming down the road. I'm like, oh, thank God they're here. So I put my firearms down.
That's what you think is the sheriff?
Yeah. So I put my firearms down on the ground because I don't want to get shot with them, with all this gunfire going on and us reporting our man on our property. And they do about 100 miles an hour past my driveway. And I'm like, well, what the heck?
Wow.
So I run out of ammunition, and then I proceed to lecture this man in the swamp. I said, I don't know why you're doing this to me. I assume, based on, because the information I just learned with this beacon going up, that you probably served in the military too, and I served just like you did. This is un-American. This is unpatriotic. The only thing that I said was that would raise alarm or suspicion was Peter Daszak worked with the CIA, so he told me. I don't know whether that's true or not. You shouldn't be doing this to me. And I walked off, anger and frustration. Had to save enough ammo in case this guy came back out after me or something. Walked back up to the house and contacted the sheriff's department again and asked them where they were. And they told us that they were diverted to a car accident. Well, the interesting thing is, then they said, well, who was involved in the car accident? Like, well, you can call and get the police reports tomorrow. So I called the sheriff's department. This is the Marquette County Sheriff's Department. The sheriff is Sheriff Zybert, and asked for a copy of these police reports. They refused to give them to me.
Mm. So even if it were true, though, how is a car accident more important than attending to a gunfight?
Yeah, I don't know. So who knows? I mean, I came up with some, these are just theories, but I go, maybe the government or their deep state actors caused a car accident to divert attention, a response to my property. That could be true. Maybe it was a fabrication. There was no car accident. It's hard to say.